Chapter 19, April 27th, 28th, 1777. In the middle of the night, the British soldiers had found the American stock of rum in a warehouse in Danbury. While they packed carts with the supplies they wanted and hauled out and burned those that wouldn't keep, it seemed like a pity to waste good rum. So they got good and drunk, and then they got lazy and violent. Moving supplies to a bonfire was too time-consuming. In the interest of efficiency, they burned down the storage barns and everything in them. The streets ran greasy with melted pork fat. The town was filled with a strange odor of burned sugar mixed with the smell of torched woolen blankets and canvas tents. General Tryon fought for control, and when he got it, he moved the troops out with all the briskness he could summon, which wasn't much considering the activities of the night. General Arnold spent the night a mile from Danbury in Bethel, Connecticut. He was up all night worrying, waiting to see which way the redcoats would go. He fired off coded messages across the New York border to General McDougal in Peekskill and John Jay in Fishkill. Arnold thought the redcoats would march toward the Hudson River. But if Tryon had ever intended to march toward the Hudson, he changed his mind now. Tryon set a goal to retreat to his ships, which sat just offshore at Campo Beach, but it was no use going back the way he had come, since all the towns along the way were waiting for them to return. Scouts in the woods were ready to run in any direction. A move to the east by Tryon would be countered by one from Patriot generals Arnold and Silliman. Tryon decided to climb the steep hillside to Ridgefield, then try his luck passing over the road that ran south the shore from there. Arnold and Silliman ran up the west side of the ridge and built a barrier of logs and carts and furniture across Ridgefield's main street, with woods on one side and a cliff on the other. 10 miles from the barrier, the 3rd Patriot General, David Wooster, caught up with the British and attacked them from the rear. His troops fired on the redcoats. They replied with cannon, and General Wooster himself fell from his horse, mortally wounded. David Wooster, who lived from 1711 to 1777. Then Colonel Ludington's regiment joined in the rout. Hidden in the trees above and shooting from behind stone walls and wells and tree trunks, they harassed the British and rushed them up against the barricade. The British soldiers and the Continental soldiers did not fight by the same rules. The British thought opposing sides should line up across a battlefield from one another. Ready, aim, fire. Those who fell were stepped over. Again, ready, aim, fire. Hold your position, keep marching forward. The soldiers who made it to the far side of the battlefield were the winners. But there weren't enough Patriot soldiers to fight that way. For them, the land they fought on wasn't just a battlefield, it was home. And if you were going to take it, it would be over their cold, dead bodies. So they did what they had to do to keep it. They snuck, they hid, snuck, spied, and shot. And if someone was bearing down on them, they didn't hold their positions, they ran. This was especially true of militiamen, whose profession was farming, not soldiering. Experienced soldiers like Benedict Arnold and Colonel Ludington became frustrated by this dashing about. Left standing alone, they wound up having to dash for cover themselves, then chase around the woods, gathering up stray men so they could mount another attack. Colonel Ludington and General Arnold and General Silliman attacked over and over all day. That night, they camped in the woods. In the morning, they resumed fighting as the British beat a retreat to the sea. In a last hurrah, British soldiers waiting aboard ship piled onto the beach and marched by the hundreds to mount a counterattack. The Patriots charged after them, backing them down the beach toward the water. At last, the redcoats escaped on their ships. Under Patriot fire, they abandoned Campo Beach and sailed back to New York. Then Benedict Arnold and his troops, and General Silliman and his troops, and General Wooster's men and Colonel Ludington's 7th Regiment of the Dutchess County Militia marched home. They came struggling home in ones and twos. The Ludingtons didn't see many of them, but the few who headed north, the Pecks and the Storms and their neighbors, came up the hill and paused at the house to get a drink and pay their respects to Mama before rushing home to their families and their fields. Each soldier's arrival carried news that hurt the Ludingtons to the core, news of lives lost, blood lost, broken bones, broken hearts. In a way, the worst were the early comers who skulked past without stopping. Some might have called them deserters. Some of those who did stop called themselves the smart ones. The idea of staying in place while men run at you with guns and knives, said one fellow. My children won't eat next winter if I don't get those seeds in the furrows now, said another man. I've got too much at stake to be somebody's scarecrow, said another father who stopped to drink. The Ludingtons waited endless hours. It got sunny and warm. When Sybil pushed up her sleeves, Mama said, "It's just that it's the first really hot day. By July, you'll be used to it." If Papa didn't come back today, what would happen to his family by July? Sybil banged out the back door and dashed for the paddock and the animals, trying not to fall apart. Suddenly, Molly was behind her, both arms around her from the back. "Come on," Sybil said. "Let's go." "Where?" "To meet Papa. I can't sit here 1 minute longer." "You think we'll find him?" Molly asked incredulously. What did they know about where Papa was, or even if he was alive? They saddled up Lady Jane. Then, once again, there were two sisters pounding down the road toward Shaw's Pond. Pale blue sky, baby green leaves sprouting almost as they passed, unfolding in the warm air. Sybil avoided the marsh of Horse Pound Road and took the main road instead, reasoning that this was the way the men would come home from the Ridgefield Road. Nightmare scenes came into Sybil's head. Papa lying dead along a shore-bound road. Papa dead in a cart coming home. Papa wounded, carried along on Sir Kay's back. Kay shot out from under him. Papa walking, limping. Suddenly, she knew where to go first. Solomon Hopkins was at work in his pea patch, his cane at his elbow, a broad hat on his head. He straightened up calmly, as though people bounding into his yard on horseback was a regular occurrence. "Mr. Hopkins, what news?" Sybil called. "News?" The dashing Miss Sybil. "Papa?" she breathed, more a prayer than a question. "No," said Solomon, "nothing yet." "Any news at all?" said Molly. "Are the British coming back? Are they coming up the Hudson?" "They might yet," said Solomon, "but not now. No, sweet, it's Timothy Carver." "Oh, no," said Sybil. Molly leaned against Lady Jane. Sybil felt a horrible jolt of sympathy for Timmy. "Where?" she asked, wanting to add to her picture of the succession of skirmishes along the road back to Campo, needing more information to add to her timeline that would bring Papa back by this day or that day, depending on what happened where. "Near Keeler's Tavern," said Solomon. "He was one of those waiting in the trees beyond the barricade." When the girls said nothing, he went on. "No, he wasn't playing to strength. He's not the sort of person you'd expect to hide up a tree like a sleeping owl." Sybil blinked. "Poor Timmy," she said. Solomon pressed his hand to his chest. "Dear Sybil, Eleazar Hazen brought him home." "But Lees are deserted," Molly burst out. "He went back," said Solomon. "He meant to follow your father after all." "Better late than never," said Sybil harshly. "Better indeed," said Solomon. When he heard Timmy had fallen from the tree, he went and found him and took him to his mother. Silently, she left Solomon in his garden, got on Jane, and pulled Molly up behind. They rode away. It seemed that everyone else could be gone in a moment. The road was a blur beneath Lady Jane's hooves. Sybil pushed the mare to a gallop, following the path she'd taken what seemed to be 100 years ago, past the Hazens to Belden's Bridge. They passed through Red Mills in a cloud of dust, the mud summer dry already. They didn't pause, didn't worry, didn't care. Nobody tried to stop them. Sybil must have turned at the mills and headed up the broad hill, but never remembered it afterward. The world was crazy and wrong if someone honest, true, and good like Timmy could be taken as he fought for a country that was born for freedom and peace. Sybil watched the carver's house grow near, forgetting the horse beneath her, forgetting they were the ones on the move. The doors were ajar, the windows thrown open in the warmth of day. Mistress Carver's peonies had huge pink buds. Voices came through the windows, women in the house and men in the yard behind. Sybil pulled Lady Jane up short. You didn't go charging into the yard of someone in mourning. Stately, silently, they headed for the paddock. Then Jane let out a whinny. Sir Kay stood tied to the rail, and through the door Sybil heard her father's voice.